Hello everyone and welcome to Inside Out with me, Susan Madaris. We're coming to you from Windy City, Chicago, Illinois. Chicago is the third most populous city in the United States after New York City and Los Angeles. The city is an international hub for finance, commerce, industry, telecommunications, and transportation. And O'Hare International Airport is the second busiest airport in the world in terms of traffic movements. The first is Atlanta. In 2012, Chicago hosted 46.2 million international and domestic visitors. The city's culture includes contributions to visual arts, novels, film, theater, and music, particularly blues and soul. The city has many nicknames which reflect the impressions and opinions about historical and contemporary Chicago. The best known is perhaps Windy City. In 2012, a soaring homicide rate and talk of a new murder capital of the United States brought a great deal of attention to Chicago. While this year murders in Chicago are down by 29%, the city continues to battle with high numbers. Join me on this edition of Inside Out as we take an in-depth look at the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for this great city. Chicago, the third largest U.S. city, drew international attention last year by surpassing 500 homicides for the first time since 2008. And although so far this year the city's murder rate is down 22% compared with the same period in 2012, it still remains the highest of the nation's three largest cities, surpassing New York and Los Angeles.
It's actually, when you look at all crimes, it's actually been declining over time. But the problem for Chicago, of course, is that the crime that most people are aware of and publicized is murder, and that rate has remained very high, although perhaps a little less this year than previous years. Overall, Chicago's crime rate drifting down a bit, but the murder rate remains, the one that captures the nation's attention.
Vince Connolly is a Chicago-based lawyer who has spent most of his life here in Windy City. I met up with him in Chicago to talk more about the fabric and history of the city and why homicide and murder has become so widespread.
Murder remains high in Chicago because gangs remain a very big problem in Chicago. And if you were to literally put the pins on the map of Chicago and then look behind most of the murders, you would find that they are in some fashion largely drug-related.
In January of 2013, the New York Times published an elaborate map on 12 years of homicides in Chicago, with information about each neighborhood's race, income, and education. Racial segregation is clearly apparent, with the majority of blacks living on what is commonly known as the South Side, also where the greatest numbers of homicides have occurred, and the majority of whites on the North Side, where the least number of homicides have occurred. These murders are almost always gang-related.
I think that's largely based upon historic circumstances in Chicago. Chicago has been traditionally a very segregated city. Different neighborhoods for white people, separate neighborhoods for African American families. Because of the segregation and because of the other underlying factors that make it very difficult for young male African Americans to succeed in any lot in life, numbers of them gravitate towards gangs. Gangs offer a way out because of their ability to profit from the drug industry, and that kind of ugly circle leads to people who put very little value on life and are willing to pull guns out, really, a whole lot more quickly than most civilized people would think could occur.
While there are no official boundaries, communities tend to stay in their own neighborhoods, and have so for decades. Neighborhoods that were poor and black in 1970 were generally poor and black in 2000. As a matter of fact, from 1970 to the year 2000, not a single Chicago neighborhood changed from black to white.
Chicago has no east side because the east side of Chicago is Lake Michigan. So it's divided into three generally similar areas. There's a north side of Chicago, which traditionally has largely been populated by white or Hispanics. There is a west side that is actually kind of a transition zone, although when most Chicagoans refer to the west side, they're talking about the African-American aspect of the west side. And then finally there's the south side of Chicago, which since the 1960s and 70s has been predominantly African-American. And while there's no legal restrictions placed on anyone, and the city is not formed in a way that causes people not to be able to travel from one section to the other, frankly though, for many, many years, there have been very, very real and rigid boundaries, largely, I think, based on financial income and the educational systems within each of the areas, where people tend to gravitate, the whites to the north side, and the African Americans remain on the south and the west side.
Mm-hmm. I asked Connolly if policies throughout the first 7 decades of the 20th century possibly led to segregation and hemmed African Americans geographically by neighborhoods.
The African American community in Chicago for many years was very cohesive, and while it suffered financially, it did not do as well as whites. At least there was a general sense that things were getting better generationally, but in more recent times, and I'm talking back several generations, the absence of education, the absence of good jobs for people who might only have a limited education, and the absence and the lessening of cohesiveness in the African American community, and by that I mean that family units have in some measure largely been replaced by single parent, ordinarily of course mothers. A lot of contributing factors to leading to very few outlets for young African uneducated males in Chicago beyond taking routes like going into gangs.
On the streets of Chicago, opinions were strong about the challenges facing the city.
100% crime. It's out of control. I think the budget cuts, Chicago police are working at a fraction of the capacity that they should be given the size of the city. And crime has just gotten out of control. The young teenagers coming out of the probably the poorer suburbs, more poorer parts of the city, are coming up into great areas like this and terrorizing the citizens. It's a really frightful situation that we're in right now.
Getting the guns off the street, that's one thing, but then also getting a mayor who's responsive to the community, who works with the community and works with the police, and we don't have a mayor like that. Mayor Emanuel is a nitwit. I mean, I don't like him personally, and I think a lot of the stuff that's gone on with the gun violence, with the unrest with like the teachers union, with a lot of stuff that goes on in city council is because we have a kind of a, I don't know, like a belligerent Democratic mayor.
Chicago's crime problem is just one of a host of issues plaguing current Mayor Rahm Emanuel, the former White House Chief of Staff for President Barack Obama, who pledged to clean up the streets of the city when he took office in 2011.
He didn't inherit much. Daley had the machine going, he had a very corrupt system, and then Emanuel steps in, and he doesn't know what to do, so, he's basically going to march in line and, be corrupt himself.
Citing budget problems, the city closed 50 public schools in May 2013, angering parents and the teachers union.
Well, my wife's a teacher. She's a third grade teacher, and I was with her the whole time that, she was with the strike and everything like that. The problem is that you have the mayor who wants to bring in all of the new way of thinking in America that we're going to privatize everything, and that's just not, I don't think, the solution. It's creating a lot of infighting with, the communities, and then again, when he shut down this recent thing where he shut down all the schools, if he would have staggered it and said, okay, we're going to give you 4 years, your school's going to be shut down, rather than saying, okay, guess what, you got 6 months or 6 weeks, your school's going to be closed, go find somewhere else to go. I think if he would have maybe worked with the communities again, been a little bit more responsive, and maybe worked closer with city council, he would have had some better results, and he could have saved money, but no, he didn't.
Rahm Emanuel recently became the mayor of Chicago 2 years ago. Prior to his becoming mayor, Richard Daley, the second of two Daleys, was the mayor of Chicago for more than 20 years. Under Richard Daley, he actually addressed the issue of education and took it on, because prior to his time, it was very easy for elected officials to simply shrug off the problem, and they didn't have to embrace it because it was a somewhat independent educational system. But now, having set that up in terms of, okay, so the top person in Chicago has recognized for a long time that education matters. The difficulty, and I don't know that it's any different in Chicago, but it seems to be, that with other cities in America, is the revenues that are available to the city in order to improve education or to improve police protection, if you think that's the answer to crime, are very, very limited. And there is a lot of, there are a limited number of dollars for a very wide number of needs. And education is talked about and thought about quite a bit, but the actual dollars that get there are clearly not meeting the issues.
So where is the money going? Connolly says the problems facing schools in the poor urban areas of Chicago are much more difficult to tackle than many assume.
Well, part of it is the economy, although these issues we're talking about, we'd be having the same conversation even before the recession that occurred in 2007. But a part of it is that the structure of Chicago, in terms of the payment to the public employees, the payment to the other infrastructures that are needed and the services that are provided by the city, eats up a fair amount of what the city is able to generate for itself. You know, we all have to remember, a city is not the federal government. It doesn't get to tax its people. New York does to a tiny extent, but that's quite exceptional. Chicago it relies upon property taxes and relies upon sales taxes, which is a very limited form of income. And it's got the host of issues that it has to deal with. And I'm repeating myself, but education gets a tiny slice of the amount of revenue that the city has to offer. I should also add, this complicates the issue, the state is also responsible on some levels for education, even on the earliest levels. Not entirely, though. It's largely the city's burden to try to sort out how do we try to better educate people who come from circumstances where education may not be a top priority as far as their, what they've learned in their immediate surroundings.
Children in urban areas also often contend with homelessness, domestic violence, abuse, and neglect.
I don't know if it's about the education system. I think it's about the family, and I think it's about family values and not valuing education. I think that's probably where it needs to start, is understanding that education is an important part of being a contributing member of society. And unless you have that happening at the family unit level, it's never going to transcend. So you could put all of this money into education, but unless it's reinforced in the home, it's never going to take root anyway. So I think there are a lot of fundamental things that we need to do to improve our lot.
Andrew Holmes grew up on the South Side and still lives there, not far from his childhood home. Holmes was a victim of gun violence almost 2 decades ago when he got involved in a crossfire. After a lengthy recovery, he connected with community leaders and became an activist. Since then, he has been active in helping fight crime, relaying details to the media, and often acting as a liaison between the victim's family and the media.
So the crime rate here, it's up, but it's no different than New York and any other city. It's just that it's happening at a faster pace here. Because when you look at the statistics, New York is still behind Chicago. Murder is murder. So I love New York, I love Chicago, but I'm not going to put a label on New York, Detroit, or Chicago. Just about 2 weeks ago, 5 murders one day in New York. So I don't believe in criticizing one city. If I'm going to help a city, and I leave a city to go to another city, I want to bring something to help the people, some jobs, some schools, some skills, so we can get rid of all the narcotics and bring the crime down.
Holmes isn't paid to fight crime. As one local reporter put it, he puts himself in the thick of things, going to crime scenes at all hours of the night. He consoles the families of victims, talks to victims, and tries to bring peace to the city's neighborhoods, one block at a time. I met up with Holmes to learn more about what he does, why he does it, and especially the steps he's been taking in helping kids stay in school and out of gangs. He tells me that one of the biggest challenges facing the city has been the fight against narcotics and human trafficking.
Yeah, we have a big narcotic issue here because we have a lot of youth using a lot of narcotics, and mainly this Molly and this ecstasy, where they're dropping these pills inside drinks, putting them inside water, and they're taking control of the youth body and the mind nowadays. With that Molly, with that ecstasy, and with this narcotics comes human trafficking. So women are forced to prostitute out on the street and a lot of them go missing. And I have a national 1-800 number, 1-800-YOU-TELL-US. That's 1-800-883-5587. We have a nationwide missing persons unit. So we track these kids down, and a lot of them we find have been indulged with this narcotics, forced into prostitution. We have a lot of prostitution here along with the drugs too, because see, human trafficking is just about $1 billion operation here, citywide. It's second behind the narcotics sale here, and if they don't get a handle on it, not only in this city, human trafficking is going to take over the narcotics trades because the gangs are working hand in hand, narcotics and human trafficking.
Andrew is also the director of No Guns, No Violence. He is also associated with Community Against Violence. While he spends a lot of time on the streets and working closely with the police, he's also busy visiting schools and speaking at seminars to educate the youth.
Well, basically, mainly what we do, and I have networked with Sean Morrison Investigation now as a private investigator slash being a community activist. So what we basically do now, we try to get to the root of the problem. We are inside the elementary schools, we're inside the high school. We're talking to whole classrooms, trying to keep their mind on schools, not gangs, not drugs. We try to get the word gangs out of their mind and drugs out of their mind. So we're hitting them deep and we're hitting them hard. We're talking to them. And we're also getting information from them, because when we speak of how many people you know, a full classroom of about, we had a full classroom of about 120 students that we talked to. How many of you all know or knew someone or have a relative who's been shot, murdered, killed? Almost about 90% of that classroom hands went up. And when we got into talking and got into talking about them deep, some of them was a lot of them's brothers, sisters, and some of them have tears coming out their eyes because, see, a lot of the cases had been solved. But what we do, we get in there to try to make a better life for them and let them know that, you know, their relative, their loved one's spirit is still here, but we want you to stay on the straight path and don't retaliate. We're here to help and help you get an education, but there's drugs, there's fast life. I don't care if your parents need some help. You as a child and as a teenager can help your parents. Don't sit at home while your parents indulging in drugs. Don't do that. Give us a call and we'll get some resources in there to get your parents some help and try to remove the child from this home here to move with another relative. Because at the same time, we want them to help themselves. See, grandmothers are raising the kids nowadays. I'm talking about real grandmothers are raising children these days in Chicago. You don't have too many mothers there. You don't have too many fathers there because of the drug addiction, but we try to keep them on the same path and faith to get them back in church, get them back to praying. Whatever religious they want to go into, we try to push them right there and let them know, hey, we love you. I want you to be somebody. It ain't about the fancy wheels, the loud music, the car pulling up on the street, trying to find out who you are, where you are, because those are perpetrators out here every day too. They're watching the young girls go to school.
And he stresses that all contacts with him or his organization are strictly confidential.
We have those that pull us to the side, and that's the reason for the 1-800 number, You Tell Us. You can call in confidential with that information, and it's constantly ringing, our phone is constantly ringing off. So we let these children know, and even older adults, look, we don't need to know your name. If you know about a crime, number one, we need that gun before it be used on somebody else. Number two, we need the person who discharged that weapon. Just lead us to that direction. Have faith, keep praying. Now those that are inside the home, same way, we talk to them. That's your mother, that's your father. Either you're gonna be in that home and put in a state institute if they OD inside that house, off this narcotics and drugs, or either you come home and find both of them dead one day, OD, we put that on their mind. Do you want to walk in your house like that? You may just have a sister or a brother, just two of you all, or just one of you all. You walking in that house every day. Your mother, your father, using narcotics, using drugs. If they're smoking or they're shooting that needle in their arm, you're going to walk in that house one day. Do you want that on your conscience? And you as a young child walking there and they sitting there dead at the table? Seek some help. We're here to help you. You're not a bad child. You're not a bad seed. You're not a trick. And as they say, you know, snitches get stitches, there's no stitches here. I believe in Almighty God himself, and everything will protect you, and we will protect you. Your name is not coming out of anywhere. What we're gonna do, we're gonna get your parents some help. So help your parents. So it's you got to get in them shoes to help them.
Holmes says he's determined in his path to bring about change. However, he calls on policymakers to step up and help.
To stop this foreclosure, but at the same time, we need more funding programs from Washington itself, grant money to put some. We sent $1 billion overseas just to fight wars, just to save other countries. But you know what? We started living in a hellhole right here, because you can turn the corner any minute and lose it.
Both my guests agree that Chicago's challenges can turn into opportunities. Before I wrapped up my interview with Vince Connolly, I asked him about the opportunities he saw for the city.
I think, and again, it's not peculiar to Chicago, but it's true with Chicago, that the vitality and the hope for the future and the progress and the enlargement and the betterment of any city is enormously connected to whether you can attract first young people, hopefully a lot of young professionals, but then maintain those young professionals in the city as their lives enlarge and they have their own families, and their families go into the educational system, and hopefully many of them remain, rather than ultimately migrate to some warmer, city in America. So that a lot of it is entailed with how do we attract those kinds of people. And Chicago has been doing a great job of attracting well-educated younger people, much more so than in the past. It's still doing a very poor job of keeping those people in the city once they start their families, which comes back to the question of people thinking that they can get better free education for their children outside the city than inside of it. The people are well aware that this is something that needs to be remedied. It's not an easy thing to do. But in general, and I may just be optimistic because I've been here and I have a stake in it, I think if you were to randomly ask people walking down any neighborhood of Chicago, do you think Chicago is likely to get better? Has it been getting better? I think people are generally optimistic about that because it does have so much to offer.
One can't argue that Chicago is a thriving city, and one that definitely leaves an impression. And finally, to quote the American writer Nelson Algren, "Once you've become a part of this particular patch, you'll never love another. Like loving a woman with a broken nose, you may well find lovelier lovelies, but never a lovely so real." That's all the time we have for this edition of Inside Out. Thanks so much for staying with us and watching. Remember, you can always send me your emails to insideout@susanmadaris.com. I'm always looking forward to them. You can also follow me on Twitter for latest updates and discussions. Until next week in another show, from all of us here in Chicago, goodbye.